Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to our latest explainer, where we're going to unpack a profoundly fascinating, deeply atmospheric piece of philosophical storytelling. Imagine, if you will, the visual aesthetic of a grim, dark graphic novel. A towering, crumbling structure shrouded in eternal night. This is the High Cathedral. It's a place of cold, decaying masonry, echoing silence, and just heavy, heavy shadows. But actually, we aren't just exploring a spooky building today. We're exploring a psychic fortress. We're unpacking a fable about the human mind, the structures we build to protect ourselves from the unknown, and what happens when those exact structures begin to collapse under their own weight. So we drop right into the silent depths of this cathedral, and there's this tense philosophical duel unfolding between our two main characters. On one side, we have the philosopher. He's this rigid, serious man, clinging desperately to order. And on the other, well, we have the jester. He's chaotic, mocking, but deeply perceptive. The jester just laughs at him. He literally points to the crumbling stone walls and mocks the fragility of the whole structure. "You call this a fortress?" he taunts. "It's just a monument to death, waiting for the night." He's basically chipping away at the illusion of safety. You see, the cathedral was built to shield humanity from the ancient, uncaring night. But the jester knows a secret. You can't build walls high enough to keep the dark out forever. Now, to really understand this structure, we have to look at the concept of the iron cage. The philosopher has spent his entire life constructing what he calls the world of arrangements. It's essentially a system of slave morality and rigid rules designed entirely as a defense mechanism. He built this psychic fortress to maintain a safe, calculated distance between his own ego and the primeval chaos that's constantly vibrating just beneath the cathedral's floorboards. It's his psychological attempt to domesticate the wild, unpredictable nature of existence. How? By locking it outside these heavy iron doors. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict of our story. We've got a stark contrast between two completely opposing forces. Over on the left side, you have the philosopher's domain. This is Apollonian logic, represented by cold, decaying stone and massive, heavy iron gears. These are his rigid mechanical axioms. But then, on the right, you have the Dionysian night, or the spirit of the depths. This is chaotic, unclassified fire. It's the wild energy of life itself. The philosopher is desperately trying to use cold iron logic to suppress a raging elemental fire. But as we're about to see, metal eventually melts when it gets too close to the flame. Deep within the vault of this decaying cathedral, the philosopher approaches the structural heart of his reality, the 7 tumblers. Now, these aren't just little locks. They are massive, heavy iron gears. Each one represents a fundamental axiom of his logical system. So the philosopher begins his mechanical routine. Step 1, he approaches the tumblers. Step 2, he recites the axioms out loud, which the story beautifully describes as a prayer by a man who flat out refuses to call it a prayer. Step 3, he puts his back into turning these massive gears. And finally, step 4, by doing all this, he forcefully denies the chaos outside. He turns the first 4 gears flawlessly. The system holds, or so he thinks. Let's see how this builds as we get to the 5th iron gear, the monster of energy. It's right here, at this 5th heavy iron gear, that his perfect mechanical reality begins to crack. For the very first time in decades, the sequence falters. The gear resists his push. Pushing against the stubborn iron, the philosopher barks his defensive axiom out loud. The sufficient does not require the dragon. He's desperately trying to convince himself that his logical system, his sufficient reality, doesn't need the wild, untamed energy of the dragon. He's trying to force the gear into place, just waving away the literal roaring beneath his feet as mere structural settling. He's trying to logic the chaos completely out of existence. But the jester, he's having none of it. He dances around him, openly mocking him. "A hollow system without its forgotten origin," he laughs. "You cannot domesticate the prima materia." The jester is revealing that the grand machine of the cathedral is literally groaning under the weight of the very thing it's trying to suppress, the monster of energy. This is the prima materia, the raw, unfiltered stuff of creation that the philosopher locked away simply because he couldn't neatly categorize it. The jester hits the nail on the head here. You simply cannot domesticate the fundamental fire of the universe. This brings us to a massive, pivotal moment of realization. The unclassified fire cannot be contained. As the philosopher strains against that 5th gear, he feels his first true moment of hesitation. The heavy iron of his axioms is literally starting to melt under the heat of the dragon he tried to bury. He realizes, with a sudden sinking dread, that logic is a fantastic tool for building a machine, sure, but it is completely powerless to contain a force of nature. The grand machine is failing. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is the transition to the sixth gear, the vault of the unanswered question. Because turning this tumbler isn't just about suppressing some metaphysical dragon anymore. No, this becomes deeply, painfully personal. The axiom for this sixth tumbler is, the beginning does not require returning to. But to turn this gear, the philosopher has to look back at a timeline he's practically tried to erase. Look at this. 20 years ago, he had a brilliant student. She asked him a question he fundamentally could not answer. Following that moment, instead of just admitting the limits of his system, he dismissed her question as premature. So she left. She departed. She was the bridge between two worlds, and when she walked away, that bridge broke. Now, in the present day, only the broken bridge remains. For 2 whole decades, he has completely refused to look back at the wreckage. You might be wondering, why was this student so dangerous to him? Well, it's because she represented the perfect union of 2 opposing psychological systems. On one hand, she possessed the philosopher's Apollonian precision, right? The love of logic, order, and structure. But she simultaneously held the alchemical imagination, which is the embrace of mystery, transformation, and the absolute unknown. For 20 years, the philosopher viewed returning to her unanswered question as a total regression into madness. He point-blank refused to cross the bridge into the alchemical, choosing to stay locked safely away in his precision. Desperate to get this sixth gear to move, the philosopher doubles down hard on his worldview. He declares, "My theology of institutions is a complete shield. Integration is a myth." He's being so stubborn here, defending his sterile, decaying kingdom. He's trying to convince the jester, but mostly himself, that his rigid rules are enough to protect him from the Dionysian night. He's telling himself that blending logic with imagination is just a fool's errand. He's holding onto his iron cage with an absolute white-knuckled grip. But the jester completely shatters that illusion with a laugh. "Your shield is broken," he cries out. He forces the philosopher to face a really brutal truth. Ignoring the beginning isn't strength, it's cowardice. The gear is only going to move when the philosopher finally understands and admits that returning to the beginning, returning to that unanswered question, is not a regression into madness at all. It's a necessary integration. True wholeness absolutely requires the spirit of the depths. The philosopher's shield was always incomplete. And that forces our narrative right into the jester's leap into the pleroma. The heavy iron of the sixth gear finally groans into place. But honestly, the victory is completely hollow. The cathedral is shaking violently now. We've hit the climax. The jester, having totally broken the philosopher's psychological defenses, starts scaling the cold, stone spine of the crumbling cathedral vault. From way up in the rafters, he looks down at everything the philosopher has built. Decades of work, this massive theology of institutions, and he delivers this incredibly mocking line. "The highest peak of human morality makes a wonderful footstool." He literally uses the philosopher's entire life's work as a jumping-off point. With a laugh that echoes through the vault, the jester leaps upward, vanishing into the pleroma, the terrifying totality of divine powers. The philosopher's illusion of control is entirely shattered. The jester is gone, leaving the philosopher to face the 7th tumbler, a haunting question. So, the crucial point here is that the final tumbler was always designed as a question. The philosopher is standing there in the center of his psychic fortress, totally alone. He looks around at the heavy iron gears, the decaying stone walls, the cold, rigid rules he used to lock away the chaos, the passion, and the spirit of the depths. He looks at the monumental effort it took just to keep the universe neatly categorized, and he asks himself this one question: has what I built been enough to live inside? He finally realizes, with just heartbreaking clarity, that his fortress is actually a tomb. And breaking decades of mechanical recitation, breaking a literal lifetime of carefully rehearsed prayers to order and logic, the philosopher speaks a single word into the nameless night: no. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. And with that single, devastating admission, the vaulted certainty of his entire kingdom simply melts away. The heavy iron gears stop turning. The iron cage dissolves completely. With a cathedral of arrangements gone, the philosopher is left standing in the vast, uncaring void. But, surprisingly, he isn't in darkness. Above him shines the great star, the impartial brilliance that witnesses the final dissolution of our constructed realities. It doesn't judge, it simply illuminates what's left when our psychic fortresses fall. This grimdark fable leaves us with a truly powerful reflection. When you strip away your own rigid axioms, your own rules, and your own desperately built walls, what structures in your mind might be waiting to melt away under the light of the great star? Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.